Part Two, Chapter 12 of Madame Bovary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Translated by Eleanor Marx Aveling. Part 2, Chapter 12. They began to love one another again. Often, even in the middle of the day, Emma suddenly wrote to him, then from the window made a sign to Justin, who, taking his apron off, quickly ran to La Huchette. Rodolphe would come. She had sent for him to tell him that she was bored, that her husband was odious, her life frightful. "But what can I do?" he cried one day impatiently. "Ah, if you would!" She was sitting on the floor between his knees, her hair loose, her look lost. "Why, what?" said Rodolphe. She sighed. "We would go and live elsewhere, somewhere." "You're really mad," he said, laughing. "How could that be possible?" She returned to the subject. He pretended not to understand, and turned the conversation. What he did not understand was all this worry about so simple an affair as love. She had a motive, a reason, and, as it were, a pendant to her affection. Her tenderness, in fact, grew each day with her repulsion to her husband. The more she gave up herself to the one, the more she loathed the other. Never had Charles seemed to her so disagreeable, to have such stodgy fingers, such vulgar ways, to be so dull, as when they found themselves together after her meeting with Rodolphe. Then, while playing the spouse and virtue, she was burning at the thought of that head whose black hair fell in a curl over the sunburnt brow, of that form at once so strong and elegant, of that man, in a word, who had such experience in his reasoning, such passion in his desires. It was for him that she filed her nails with the care of a chaser, and that there was never enough cold cream for her skin, nor of patchouli for her handkerchiefs. She loaded herself with bracelets, rings, and necklaces. When he was coming, she filled the two large blue glass vases with roses, and prepared her room and her person like a courtesan expecting a prince. The servant had to be constantly washing linen, and all day Félicité did not stir from the kitchen, where little Justin, who often kept her company, watched her at work. With his elbows on the long board on which she was ironing, he greedily watched all these women's clothes spread about him, the dimity petticoats, the fichus, the collars, and the drawers with running strings, wide at the hips and growing narrower below. "What is that for?" asked the young fellow, passing his hand over the crinoline or the hooks and eyes. "Why, haven't you ever seen anything?" Félicité answered, laughing. "As if your mistress, Madame Homais, didn't wear the same." "Oh, I dare say, Madame Homais!" And he added with a meditative air, "as if she were a lady like Madame." But Félicité grew impatient of seeing him hanging around her. She was 6 years older than he, and Théodore, Monsieur Guillaumin's servant, was beginning to pay court to her. "Let me alone," she said, moving her pot of starch. "You had better be off and pound almonds. You are always dangling about women. Before you meddle with such things, bad boy, wait till you've got a beard to your chin. Oh, don't be cross. I'll go and clean her boots." And he at once took down from the shelf Emma's boots, all coated with mud, the mud of the rendezvous, that crumbled into powder beneath his fingers, and that he watched as it gently rose in a ray of sunlight. "How afraid you are of spoiling them!" said the servant, who wasn't so particular when she cleaned them herself, because as soon as the stuff of the boots was no longer fresh, Madame handed them over to her. Emma had a number in her cupboard that she squandered one after the other, without Charles allowing himself the slightest observation. So also he disbursed 300 francs for a wooden leg that she thought proper to make a present of to Hippolyte. Its top was covered with cork, and it had spring joints, a complicated mechanism covered over by black trousers ending in a patent leather boot. But Hippolyte, not daring to use such a handsome leg every day, begged Madame Bovary to get him another more convenient one. The doctor, of course, had again to defray the expense of this purchase. So, little by little, the stableman took up his work again. One saw him running about the village as before, and when Charles heard from afar the sharp noise of the wooden leg, he at once went in another direction. It was Monsieur Lheureux, the shopkeeper, who had undertaken the order. This provided him with an excuse for visiting Emma. He chatted with her about the new goods from Paris, about 1,000 feminine trifles, made himself very obliging, and never asked for his money. Emma yielded to this lazy mode of satisfying all her caprices. Thus she wanted to have a very handsome riding whip that was at an umbrella maker's at Rouen, to give to Rodolphe. The week after, Monsieur Lheureux placed it on her table. But the next day he called on her with a bill for 270 francs, not counting the centimes. Emma was much embarrassed. All the drawers of the writing table were empty; they owed over a fortnight's wages to Lestiboudois, 2 quarters to the servant, for any quantity of other things, and Bovary was impatiently expecting Monsieur de Roseret's account, which he was in the habit of paying every year about midsummer. She succeeded at first in putting off Lheureux. At last he lost patience. He was being sued, his capital was out, and unless he got some in he should be forced to take back all the goods she had received. "Oh, very well, take them," said Emma. "I was only joking," he replied. "The only thing I regret is the whip. My word! I'll ask monsieur to return it to me." "No, no," she said. "Ah, I've got you," thought Lheureux; and certain of his discovery, he went out, repeating to himself in an undertone, and with his usual low whistle, "Good. We shall see. We shall see." She was thinking how to get out of this when the servant, coming in, put on the mantelpiece a small roll of blue paper from Monsieur de Roseret's. Emma pounced upon it and opened it. It contained 15 napoleons. It was the account. She heard Charles on the stairs, threw the gold to the back of her drawer, and took out the key. 3 days after, Lheureux reappeared. "I have an arrangement to suggest to you," he said. "If, instead of the sum agreed on, you would take—" "Here it is," she said, placing 14 napoleons in his hand. The tradesman was dumbfounded. Then, to conceal his disappointment, he was profuse in apologies and proffers of service, all of which Emma declined. Then she remained a few moments, fingering in the pocket of her apron the 2 5-franc pieces that he had given her in change. She promised herself she would economize, in order to pay back later on. Pshaw! she thought, he won't think about it again. Besides the riding whip with its silver gilt handle, Rodolphe had received a seal with the motto Amour nel cor. Furthermore, a scarf for a muffler, and finally a cigar case, exactly like the Viscount's, that Charles had formerly picked up in the road, and that Emma had kept. These presents, however, humiliated him. He refused several. She insisted, and he ended by obeying, thinking her tyrannical and over exacting. Then she had strange ideas. "When midnight strikes," she said, "you must think of me." And if he confessed that he had not thought of her, there were floods of reproaches that always ended with the eternal question, "Do you love me?" "Why, of course I love you," he answered. "A great deal?" "Certainly. You haven't loved others? Do you think you'd got a virgin?" he exclaimed, laughing. Emma cried, and he tried to console her, adorning his protestations with puns. "Oh!" she went on, "I love you so that I could not live without you. Do you see? There are times when I long to see you again, when I am torn by all the anger of love. I ask myself, where is he? Perhaps he's talking to other women. They smile upon him. He approaches. Oh no, no one else pleases you. There are some more beautiful, but I love you best. I know how to love best. I am your servant, your concubine. You are my king, my idol. You are good, you are beautiful, you are clever, you are strong." He had so often heard these things said that they did not strike him as original. Emma was like all his mistresses, and the charm of novelty, gradually falling away like a garment, laid bare the eternal monotony of passion, that has always the same forms and the same language. He did not distinguish, this man of so much experience, the difference of sentiment beneath the sameness of expression. Because lips libertine and venal had murmured such words to him, he believed but little in the candour of hers. Exaggerated speeches hiding mediocre affections must be discounted, as if the fulness of the soul did not sometimes overflow in the emptiest metaphors, since no one can ever give the exact measure of his needs, nor of his conceptions, nor of his sorrows, and since human speech is like a cracked tin kettle, on which we hammer out tunes to make bears dance when we long to move the stars. But with that superior critical judgment that belongs to him who, in no matter what circumstance, holds back, Rodolphe saw other delights to be got out of this love. He thought all modesty in the way. He treated her quite sans façon. He made of her something supple and corrupt. Hers was an idiotic sort of attachment, full of admiration for him, of voluptuousness for her, a beatitude that benumbed her. Her soul sank into this drunkenness, shrivelled up, drowned in it, like Clarence in his butt of Malmsey. By the mere effect of her love, Madame Bovary's manners changed. Her looks grew bolder, her speech more free. She even committed the impropriety of walking out with Monsieur Rodolphe, a cigarette in her mouth, as if to defy the people. At last those who still doubted, doubted no longer, when one day they saw her getting out of the "Hirondelle," her waist squeezed into a waistcoat like a man; and Madame Bovary senior, who, after a fearful scene with her husband, had taken refuge at her son's, was not the least scandalised of the womenfolk. Many other things displeased her. First, Charles had not attended to her advice about the forbidding of novels. Then the "ways of the house" annoyed her. She allowed herself to make some remarks, and there were quarrels, especially one on account of Félicité. Madame Bovary senior, the evening before, passing along the passage, had surprised her in company of a man with a brown collar, about 40 years old, who, at the sound of her step, had quickly escaped through the kitchen. Then Emma began to laugh, but the good lady grew angry, declaring that unless morals were to be laughed at, one ought to look after those of one's servants. "Where were you brought up?" asked the daughter in law, with so impertinent a look that Madame Bovary asked her if she were not perhaps defending her own case. "Leave the room!" said the young woman, springing up with a bound. "Emma! Mamma!" cried Charles, trying to reconcile them. But both had fled in their exasperation. Emma was stamping her feet as she repeated, "Oh, what manners! What a peasant!" He ran to his mother. She was beside herself. She stammered, "She's an insolent, giddy headed thing, or perhaps worse." And she was for leaving at once if the other did not apologize. So Charles went back again to his wife, and implored her to give way. He knelt to her. She ended by saying, "Very well, I'll go to her." And in fact she held out her hand to her mother in law with the dignity of a marchioness, as she said, "Excuse me, madame." Then, having gone up again to her room, she threw herself flat on her bed, and cried there like a child, her face buried in the pillow. She and Rodolphe had agreed that in the event of anything extraordinary occurring, she should fasten a small piece of white paper to the blind, so that if by chance he happened to be in Yonville, he could hurry to the lane behind the house. Emma made the signal. She had been waiting 3/4 of an hour when she suddenly caught sight of Rodolphe at the corner of the market. She felt tempted to open the window and call him, but he had already disappeared. She fell back in despair. Soon, however, it seemed to her that some one was walking on the pavement. It was he, no doubt. She went downstairs, crossed the yard. He was there outside. She threw herself into his arms. "Do take care," he said. "Ah, if you knew!" she replied. And she began telling him everything, hurriedly, disjointedly, exaggerating the facts, inventing many, and so prodigal of parentheses that he understood nothing of it. "Come, my poor angel, courage! Be comforted! Be patient!" "But I have been patient. I have suffered for 4 years. A love like ours ought to show itself in the face of heaven. They torture me. I can bear it no longer. Save me!" She clung to Rodolphe. Her eyes, full of tears, flashed like flames beneath a wave. Her breast heaved. He had never loved her so much, so that he lost his head and said, "What is it? What do you wish?" "Take me away!" she cried. "Carry me off! Oh, I pray you!" And she threw herself upon his mouth, as if to seize there the unexpected consent, if breathed forth in a kiss. "But," Rodolphe resumed. "What?" "Your little girl." She reflected a few moments, then replied, "We will take her. It can't be helped." "What a woman!" he said to himself, watching her as she went. For she had run into the garden. Some one was calling her. On the following days Madame Bovary senior was much surprised at the change in her daughter in law. Emma, in fact, was showing herself more docile, and even carried her deference so far as to ask for a recipe for pickling gherkins. Was it the better to deceive them both, or did she wish by a sort of voluptuous stoicism to feel the more profoundly the bitterness of the things she was about to leave? But she paid no heed to them. On the contrary, she lived as lost in the anticipated delight of her coming happiness. It was an eternal subject for conversation with Rodolphe. She leant on his shoulder, murmuring "Ah, when we are in the mail coach! Do you think about it? Can it be? It seems to me that the moment I feel the carriage start it will be as if we were rising in a balloon, as if we were setting out for the clouds. Do you know that I count the hours? And you?" Never had Madame Bovary been so beautiful as at this period. She had that indefinable beauty that results from joy, from enthusiasm, from success, and that is only the harmony of temperament with circumstances. Her desires, her sorrows, the experience of pleasure, and her ever young illusions, that had, as soil and rain and winds and the sun make flowers grow, gradually developed her, and she at length blossomed forth in all the plenitude of her nature. Her eyelids seemed chiselled expressly for her long amorous looks, in which the pupil disappeared, while a strong inspiration expanded her delicate nostrils, and raised the fleshy corner of her lips, shaded in the light by a little black down. One would have thought that an artist, apt in conception, had arranged the curls of hair upon her neck. They fell in a thick mass, negligently, and with the changing chances of their adultery, that unbound them every day. Her voice now took more mellow inflections, her figure also; something subtle and penetrating escaped even from the folds of her gown and from the line of her foot. Charles, as when they were first married, thought her delicious and quite irresistible. When he came home in the middle of the night he did not dare to wake her. The porcelain night light threw a round trembling gleam upon the ceiling, and the drawn curtains of the little cot formed, as it were, a white hut standing out in the shade, and by the bedside Charles looked at them. He seemed to hear the light breathing of his child. She would grow big now; every season would bring rapid progress. He already saw her coming from school as the day drew in, laughing, with ink stains on her jacket, and carrying her basket on her arm. Then she would have to be sent to boarding school. That would cost much. How was it to be done? Then he reflected. He thought of hiring a small farm in the neighbourhood, that he would superintend every morning on his way to his patients. He would save up what he brought in. He would put it in the savings bank. Then he would buy shares somewhere, no matter where. Besides, his practice would increase. He counted upon that, for he wanted Berthe to be well educated, to be accomplished, to learn to play the piano. Ah, how pretty she would be later on, when she was 15, when, resembling her mother, she would, like her, wear large straw hats in the summer time. From a distance they would be taken for two sisters. He pictured her to himself, working in the evening by their side beneath the light of the lamp. She would embroider him slippers, she would look after the house, she would fill all the home with her charm and her gaiety. At last they would think of her marriage. They would find her some good young fellow with a steady business. He would make her happy. This would last for ever. Emma was not asleep. She pretended to be, and while he dozed off by her side she awakened to other dreams. To the gallop of four horses she was carried away for a week towards a new land, whence they would return no more. They went on and on, their arms entwined, without a word. Often from the top of a mountain there suddenly glimpsed some splendid city, with domes and bridges and ships, forests of citron trees, and cathedrals of white marble, on whose pointed steeples were storks' nests. They went at a walking pace because of the great flagstones, and on the ground there were bouquets of flowers, offered you by women dressed in red bodices. They heard the chiming of bells, the neighing of mules, together with the murmur of guitars and the noise of fountains, whose rising spray refreshed heaps of fruit arranged like a pyramid at the foot of pale statues that smiled beneath playing waters. And then one night they came to a fishing village, where brown nets were drying in the wind along the cliffs and in front of the huts. It was there that they would stay. They would live in a low, flat roofed house, shaded by a palm tree, in the heart of a gulf, by the sea. They would row in gondolas, swing in hammocks, and their existence would be easy and large as their silk gowns, warm and star spangled as the nights they would contemplate. However, in the immensity of this future that she conjured up, nothing special stood forth. The days, all magnificent, resembled each other like waves, and it swayed in the horizon, infinite, harmonised, azure, and bathed in sunshine. But the child began to cough in her cot, or Bovary snored more loudly, and Emma did not fall asleep till morning, when the dawn whitened the windows, and when little Justin was already in the square taking down the shutters of the chemist's shop. She had sent for Monsieur Lheureux, and had said to him, "I want a cloak, a large lined cloak with a deep collar." "You're going on a journey?" he asked. "No, but never mind. I may count on you, may I not, and quickly?" He bowed. "Besides, I shall want," she went on, "a trunk, not too heavy, handy." "Yes, yes, I understand." "About 3 feet by a foot and a half, as they are being made just now." "And a travelling bag." "Decidedly," thought Lheureux, "there's a row on here." "And," said Madame Bovary, taking her watch from her belt, "take this. You can pay yourself out of it." But the tradesman cried out that she was wrong. They knew one another. Did he doubt her? What childishness! She insisted, however, on his taking at least the chain, and Lheureux had already put it in his pocket and was going, when she called him back. "You will leave everything at your place. As to the cloak," she seemed to be reflecting, "do not bring it either. You can give me the maker's address, and tell him to have it ready for me." It was the next month that they were to run away. She was to leave Yonville as if she was going on some business to Rouen. Rodolphe would have booked the seats, procured the passports, and even have written to Paris in order to have the whole mail coach reserved for them as far as Marseilles, where they would buy a carriage, and go on thence without stopping to Genoa. She would take care to send her luggage to Lheureux, whence it would be taken direct to the "Hirondelle," so that no one would have any suspicion. And in all this there never was any allusion to the child. Rodolphe avoided speaking of her. Perhaps he no longer thought about it. He wished to have 2 more weeks before him to arrange some affairs. Then, at the end of a week, he wanted 2 more. Then he said he was ill. Next he went on a journey. The month of August passed, and after all these delays they decided that it was to be irrevocably fixed for the 4th of September, a Monday. At length the Saturday before arrived. Rodolphe came in the evening, earlier than usual. "Everything is ready?" she asked him. "Yes." Then they walked round a garden bed, and went to sit down near the terrace on the curbstone of the wall. "You are sad," said Emma. "No. Why?" And yet he looked at her strangely, in a tender fashion. "It is because you are going away?" she went on. "Because you are leaving what is dear to you, your life?" "Ah, I understand. I have nothing in the world. You are all to me, so shall I be to you. I will be your people, your country. I will tend, I will love you." "How sweet you are!" he said, seizing her in his arms. "Really?" she said, with a voluptuous laugh. "Do you love me? Swear it, then." "Do I love you? Love you? I adore you, my love." The moon, full and purple coloured, was rising right out of the earth at the end of the meadow. She rose quickly between the branches of the poplars that hid her here and there like a black curtain pierced with holes. Then she appeared, dazzling with whiteness, in the empty heavens that she lit up, and now, sailing more slowly along, let fall upon the river a great stain that broke up into an infinity of stars, and the silver sheen seemed to writhe through the very depths, like a heedless serpent covered with luminous scales. It also resembled some monster candelabra, all along which sparkled drops of diamonds running together. The soft night was about them. Masses of shadow filled the branches. Emma, her eyes half closed, breathed in with deep sighs the fresh wind that was blowing. They did not speak, lost as they were in the rush of their reverie. The tenderness of the old days came back to their hearts, full and silent as the flowing river, with the softness of the perfume of the syringas, and threw across their memories shadows more immense and more sombre than those of the still willows that lengthened out over the grass. Often some night animal, hedgehog or weasel, setting out on the hunt, disturbed the lovers, or sometimes they heard a ripe peach falling all alone from the espalier. "Ah, what a lovely night!" said Rodolphe. "We shall have others," replied Emma, and as if speaking to herself, "Yet it will be good to travel. And yet, why should my heart be so heavy? Is it dread of the unknown? The effect of habits left, or rather no, it is the excess of happiness. How weak I am! Am I not? Forgive me!" "There is still time," he cried. "Reflect. Perhaps you may repent." "Never!" she cried impetuously. And coming closer to him, "What ill could come to me? There is no desert, no precipice, no ocean I would not traverse with you. The longer we live together, the more it will be like an embrace, every day closer, more heart to heart. There will be nothing to trouble us, no cares, no obstacle. We shall be alone, all to ourselves eternally. Oh, speak! Answer me!" At regular intervals he answered, "Yes, yes." She had passed her hands through his hair, and she repeated in a childlike voice, despite the big tears which were falling, "Rodolphe, Rodolphe! Ah, Rodolphe, dear little Rodolphe!" Midnight struck. "Midnight!" said she. "Come, it is to morrow. One day more." He rose to go, and as if the movement he made had been the signal for their flight, Emma said, suddenly assuming a gay air "You have the passports?" "Yes." "You are forgetting nothing?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Certainly." "It is at the Hotel de Provence, is it not, that you will wait for me at midday?" He nodded. "Till to morrow, then," said Emma in a last caress, and she watched him go. He did not turn round. She ran after him, and leaning over the water's edge between the bulrushes, "To morrow!" she cried. He was already on the other side of the river, and walking fast across the meadow. After a few moments Rodolphe stopped, and when he saw her with her white gown gradually fade away in the shade like a ghost, he was seized with such a beating of the heart that he leant against a tree lest he should fall. "What an imbecile I am!" he said with a fearful oath. No matter, she was a pretty mistress. And immediately Emma's beauty, with all the pleasures of their love, came back to him. For a moment he softened, then he rebelled against her. "For, after all," he exclaimed, gesticulating, "I can't exile myself, have a child on my hands." He was saying these things to give himself firmness. "And besides, the worry, the expense. Ah, no, 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 no! 1,000 times no! That would be too stupid." Chapter 12. Part 2, Chapter 13 of Madame Bovary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Translated by Eleanor Marx Aveling. Part 2, Chapter 13. No sooner was Rodolphe at home than he sat down quickly at his bureau under the stag's head that hung as a trophy on the wall. But when he had the pen between his fingers he could think of nothing, so that, resting on his elbows, he began to reflect. Emma seemed to him to have receded into a far off past, as if the resolution he had taken had suddenly placed a distance between them. To get back something of her, he fetched from the cupboard at the bedside an old Rheims biscuit box, in which he usually kept his letters from women, and from it came an odour of dry dust and withered roses. First he saw a handkerchief with pale little spots. It was a handkerchief of hers. Once, when they were walking, her nose had bled. He had forgotten it. Near it, chipped at all the corners, was a miniature given him by Emma. Her toilette seemed to him pretentious, and her languishing look in the worst possible taste. Then, from looking at this image, and recalling the memory of its original, Emma's features, little by little, grew confused in his remembrance, as if the living and the painted face, rubbing one against the other, had effaced each other. Finally he read some of her letters. They were full of explanations relating to their journey, short, technical, and urgent, like business notes. He wanted to see the long ones again, those of old times. In order to find them at the bottom of the box, Rodolphe disturbed all the others, and mechanically began rummaging amidst this mass of papers and things, finding pell mell bouquets, garters, a black mask, pins, and hair, dark and fair. Some even, catching in the hinges of the box, broke when it was opened. Thus, dallying with his souvenirs, he examined the writing and the style of the letters, as varied as their orthography. They were tender or jovial, facetious, melancholy. There were some that asked for love, others that asked for money. A word recalled faces to him, certain gestures, the sound of a voice. Sometimes, however, he remembered nothing at all. In fact, these women, rushing at once into his thoughts, cramped each other and lessened, as reduced to a uniform level of love that equalized them all. So, taking handfuls of the mixed up letters, he amused himself for some moments with letting them fall in cascades from his right into his left hand. At last, bored and weary, Rodolphe took back the box to the cupboard, saying to himself, "What a lot of rubbish!" which summed up his opinion, for pleasures, like schoolboys in a school courtyard, had so trampled upon his heart that no green thing grew there, and that which passed through it, more heedless than children, did not even, like them, leave a name carved upon the wall. "Come," he said, "let's begin." He wrote "Courage, Emma, courage! I would not bring misery into your life." "After all, that's true. thought Rodolphe. I am acting in her interest. I am honest. Have you carefully weighed your resolution? Do you know to what an abyss I was dragging you, poor angel? No, you do not, do you? You were coming, confident and fearless, believing in happiness in the future. Ah, unhappy that we are! Insensate! Rodolphe stopped here to think of some good excuse. If I told her all my fortune is lost? No. Besides, that would stop nothing. It would all have to be begun over again later on. As if one could make women like that listen to reason! He reflected, then went on I shall not forget you, oh, believe it, and I shall ever have a profound devotion for you. But some day, sooner or later, this ardour such is the fate of human things would have grown less, no doubt. Lassitude would have come to us, and who knows if I should not even have had the atrocious pain of witnessing your remorse, of sharing it myself, since I should have been its cause. The mere idea of the grief that would come to you tortures me, Emma. Forget me! Why did I ever know you? Why were you so beautiful? Is it my fault? Oh, my God! No, no! Accuse only fate. That's a word that always tells, he said to himself. Ah, if you had been one of those frivolous women that one sees, certainly I might, through egotism, have tried an experiment, in that case without danger for you. But that delicious exaltation, at once your charm and your torment, has prevented you from understanding, adorable woman that you are, the falseness of our future position. Nor had I reflected upon this at first, and I rested in the shade of that ideal happiness as beneath that of the manchineel tree, without foreseeing the consequences. Perhaps you'll think I'm giving it up from avarice. Ah, well, so much the worse. It must be stopped. The world is cruel, Emma. Wherever we might have gone, it would have persecuted us. You would have had to put up with indiscreet questions, calumny, contempt, insult perhaps. Insult to you! Oh! And I, who would place you on a throne, I who bear with me your memory as a talisman. For I am going to punish myself by exile for all the ill I have done you. I am going away. Whither I know not. I am mad. Adieu! Be good always. Preserve the memory of the unfortunate who has lost you. Teach my name to your child. Let her repeat it in her prayers. The wicks of the candles flickered. Rodolphe got up to shut the window, and when he had sat down again "I think it's all right." "Ah! And this for fear she should come and hunt me up." "I shall be far away when you read these sad lines, for I have wished to flee as quickly as possible, to shun the temptation of seeing you again. No weakness! I shall return, and perhaps later on we shall talk together very coldly of our old love. Adieu!" And there was a last adieu, divided into two words, "A Dieu," which he thought in very excellent taste. "Now, how am I to sign?" he said to himself. "Yours devotedly? No. Your friend? Yes, that's it. Your friend." He re-read his letter. He considered it very good. "Poor little woman!" he thought with emotion. "She'll think me harder than a rock. There ought to have been some tears on this, but I can't cry. It isn't my fault." Then, having emptied some water into a glass, Rodolphe dipped his finger into it and let a big drop fall on the paper that made a pale stain on the ink. Then, looking for a seal, he came upon the one "Amor nel cor." "That doesn't at all fit with the circumstances. Pshaw! Never mind." After which he smoked 3 pipes and went to bed. The next day, when he was up, at about 2 o'clock (he had slept late), Rodolphe had a basket of apricots picked. He put his letter at the bottom under some vine leaves, and at once ordered Girard, his ploughman, to take it with care to Madame Bovary. He made use of this means for corresponding with her, sending, according to the season, fruits or game. "If she asks after me," he said, "you will tell her that I have gone on a journey. You must give the basket to her herself, into her own hands. Get along and take care." Girard put on his new blouse, knotted his handkerchief round the apricots, and walking with great heavy steps in his thick iron bound galoshes, made his way to Yonville. Madame Bovary, when he got to her house, was arranging a bundle of linen on the kitchen table with Félicité. "Here," said the ploughboy, "is something for you from the master." She was seized with apprehension, and as she sought in her pocket for some coppers, she looked at the peasant with haggard eyes, while he himself looked at her with amazement, not understanding how such a present could so move any one. At last he went out. Félicité remained. She could bear it no longer. She ran into the sitting room as if to take the apricots there, overturned the basket, tore away the leaves, found the letter, opened it, and as if some fearful fire were behind her, Emma flew to her room terrified. Charles was there. She saw him. He spoke to her. She heard nothing, and she went on quickly up the stairs, breathless, distraught, dumb, and ever holding this horrible piece of paper that crackled between her fingers like a plate of sheet iron. On the second floor she stopped before the attic door, which was closed. Then she tried to calm herself. She recalled the letter. She must finish it. She did not dare to. And where? How? She would be seen. Ah, no, here, she thought. I shall be all right. Emma pushed open the door and went in. The slates threw straight down a heavy heat that gripped her temples, stifled her. She dragged herself to the closed garret window. She drew back the bolt, and the dazzling light burst in with a leap. Opposite, beyond the roofs, stretched the open country till it was lost to sight. Down below, underneath her, the village square was empty, the stones of the pavement glittered, the weathercocks on the houses were motionless. At the corner of the street, from a lower story, rose a kind of humming with strident modulations. It was Binet turning. She leant against the embrasure of the window, and reread the letter with angry sneers. But the more she fixed her attention upon it, the more confused were her ideas. She saw him again, heard him, encircled him with her arms, and throbs of her heart, that beat against her breast like blows of a sledge hammer, grew faster and faster, with uneven intervals. She looked about her with the wish that the earth might crumble into pieces. Why not end it all? What restrained her? She was free. She advanced, looking at the paving stones, saying to herself, "Come, come!" The luminous ray that came straight up from below drew the weight of her body towards the abyss. It seemed to her that the ground of the oscillating square went up the walls, and that the floor dipped on end like a tossing boat. She was right at the edge, almost hanging, surrounded by vast space. The blue of the heavens suffused her, the air was whirling in her hollow head. She had but to yield, to let herself be taken, and the humming of the lathe never ceased, like an angry voice calling her. "Emma! Emma!" cried Charles. She stopped. "Wherever are you? Come!" The thought that she had just escaped from death almost made her faint with terror. She closed her eyes, then she shivered at the touch of a hand on her sleeve. It was Félicité. "Master is waiting for you, madame. The soup is on the table." And she had to go down to sit at table. She tried to eat. The food choked her. Then she unfolded her napkin as if to examine the darns, and she really thought of applying herself to this work, counting the threads in the linen. Suddenly the remembrance of the letter returned to her. How had she lost it? Where could she find it? But she felt such weariness of spirit that she could not even invent a pretext for leaving the table. Then she became a coward. She was afraid of Charles. He knew all, that was certain. Indeed, he pronounced these words in a strange manner. "We are not likely to see Monsieur Rodolphe soon again, it seems." "Who told you?" she said, shuddering. "Who told me?" he replied, rather astonished at her abrupt tone. "Why, Girard, whom I met just now at the door of the Café Français. He has gone on a journey, or is to go." She gave a sob. "What surprises you in that? He absents himself like that from time to time for a change, and ma foi, I think he's right, when one has a fortune and is a bachelor. Besides, he has jolly times, has our friend. He's a bit of a rake. Monsieur Langlois told me " He stopped for propriety's sake because the servant came in. She put back into the basket the apricots scattered on the sideboard. Charles, without noticing his wife's colour, had them brought to him, took one, and bit into it. "Ah, perfect!" he said. "Just taste!" And he handed her the basket, which she put away from her gently. "Do just smell! What an odour!" he remarked, passing it under her nose several times. "I'm choking!" she cried, leaping up. But by an effort of will the spasm passed. Then "It's nothing," she said. "It's nothing. It is nervousness. Sit down and go on eating." For she dreaded lest he should begin questioning her, attending to her, and that she should not be left alone. Charles, to obey her, sat down again, and he spat the stones of the apricots into his hands, afterwards putting them on his plate. Suddenly a blue tilbury passed across the square at a rapid trot. Emma uttered a cry and fell back rigid to the ground. In fact, Rodolphe, after many reflections, had decided to set out for Rouen. Now, as from La Huchette to Buchy there is no other way than by Yonville, he had to go through the village, and Emma had recognized him by the rays of the lanterns, which, like lightning, flashed through the twilight. The chemist, at the tumult which broke out in the house, ran thither. The table with all the plates was upset. Sauce, meat, knives, the salt and cruet stand were strewn over the room. Charles was calling for help. Berthe, scared, was crying, and Félicité, whose hands trembled, was unlacing her mistress, whose whole body shivered convulsively. "I'll run to my laboratory for some aromatic vinegar," said the druggist. Then, as she opened her eyes on smelling the bottle, "I was sure of it," he remarked. "That would wake any dead person for you." "Speak to us," said Charles. "Collect yourself. It is your Charles who loves you. Do you know me? See, here is your little girl. Oh, kiss her!" The child stretched out her arms to her mother to cling to her neck. But turning away her head, Emma said in a broken voice, "No, no, no one." She fainted again. They carried her to her bed. She lay there stretched at full length, her lips apart, her eyelids closed, her hands open, motionless and white as a waxen image. 2 streams of tears flowed from her eyes and fell slowly upon the pillow. Charles, standing up, was at the back of the alcove, and the chemist, near him, maintained that meditative silence that is becoming on the serious occasions of life. "Do not be uneasy," he said, touching his elbow. "I think the paroxysm is past." "Yes, she is resting a little now," answered Charles, watching her sleep. "Poor girl! poor girl! She had gone off now." Then Homais asked how the accident had come about. Charles answered that she had been taken ill suddenly while she was eating some apricots. "Extraordinary!" continued the chemist. "But it might be that the apricots had brought on the syncope. Some natures are so sensitive to certain smells, and it would even be a very fine question to study both in its pathological and physiological relation. The priests know the importance of it, they who have introduced aromatics into all their ceremonies. It is to stupefy the senses, and to bring on ecstasies, a thing, moreover, very easy in persons of the weaker sex, who are more delicate than the other. Some are cited who faint at the smell of burnt hartshorn, of new bread. "Take care, you'll wake her," said Bovary in a low voice. "And not only," the druggist went on, "are human beings subject to such anomalies, but animals also. Thus you are not ignorant of the singularly aphrodisiac effect produced by the Nepeta cataria, vulgarly called catmint, on the feline race. And, on the other hand, to quote an example whose authenticity I can answer for, Brideau, one of my old comrades at present established in the Rue Malpalu, possesses a dog that falls into convulsions as soon as you hold out a snuff box to him. He often even makes the experiment before his friends at his summer house at Guillaume Wood. Would any one believe that a simple sternutation could produce such ravages on a quadrupedal organism? It is extremely curious, is it not?" "Yes," said Charles, who was not listening to him. "This shows us," went on the other, smiling with benign self sufficiency, "the innumerable irregularities of the nervous system. With regard to madame, she has always seemed to me, I confess, very susceptible; and so I should by no means recommend to you, my dear friend, any of those so called remedies that, under the pretence of attacking the symptoms, attack the constitution. No, no useless physicking. Diet, that is all. Sedatives, emollients, dulcification. Then don't you think that perhaps her imagination should be worked upon?" "In what way? How?" said Bovary. "Ah, that is it. Such is indeed the question. That is the question, as I lately read in a newspaper." But Emma, awaking, cried out, "The letter! The letter!" They thought she was delirious, and she was by midnight. Brain fever had set in. For 43 days Charles did not leave her. He gave up all his patience; he no longer went to bed; he was constantly feeling her pulse, putting on sinapisms and cold water compresses. He sent Justin as far as Neufchâtel for ice. The ice melted on the way. He sent him back again. He called Monsieur Canivet into consultation. He sent for Doctor Lariviere, his old master, from Rouen. He was in despair. What alarmed him most was Emma's prostration, for she did not speak, did not listen, did not even seem to suffer, as if her body and soul were both resting together after all their troubles. About the middle of October she could sit up in bed supported by pillows. Charles wept when he saw her eat her first bread and jelly. Her strength returned to her. She got up for a few hours of an afternoon, and one day, when she felt better, he tried to take her, leaning on his arm, for a walk round the garden. The sand of the paths was disappearing beneath the dead leaves. She walked slowly, dragging along her slippers, and leaning against Charles's shoulder. She smiled all the time. They went thus to the bottom of the garden near the terrace. She drew herself up slowly, shading her eyes with her hand to look. She looked far off, as far as she could, but on the horizon were only great bonfires of grass smoking on the hills. "You will tire yourself, my darling," said Bovary, and pushing her gently to make her go into the arbour. "Sit down on this seat. You'll be comfortable." "Oh no, not there," she said in a faltering voice. She was seized with giddiness, and from that evening her illness recommenced, with a more uncertain character, it is true, and more complex symptoms. Now she suffered in her heart, then in the chest, the head, the limbs; she had vomitings, in which Charles thought he saw the first signs of cancer. And besides this, the poor fellow was worried about money matters. Chapter 13. Part 2, Chapter 14 of Madame Bovary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Translated by Eleanor Marx Aveling. Part 2, Chapter 14. To begin with, he did not know how he could pay Monsieur Homais for all the physic supplied by him, and though, as a medical man, he was not obliged to pay for it, he nevertheless blushed a little at such an obligation. Then the expenses of the household, now that the servant was mistress, became terrible. Bills rained in upon the house. The tradesmen grumbled. Monsieur Lheureux especially harassed him. In fact, at the height of Emma's illness, the latter, taking advantage of the circumstances to make his bill larger, had hurriedly brought the cloak, the travelling bag, 2 trunks instead of 1, and a number of other things. It was very well for Charles to say he did not want them. The tradesman answered arrogantly that these articles had been ordered, and that he would not take them back. Besides, it would vex madame in her convalescence. The doctor had better think it over. In short, he was resolved to sue him rather than give up his rights and take back his goods. Charles subsequently ordered them to be sent back to the shop. Félicité forgot. He had other things to attend to, then thought no more about them. Monsieur Lheureux returned to the charge, and by turns, threatening and whining, so managed that Bovary ended by signing a bill at 6 months. But hardly had he signed this bill than a bold idea occurred to him. It was to borrow 1,000 francs from Lheureux. So, with an embarrassed air, he asked if it were possible to get them, adding that it would be for a year, at any interest he wished. Lheureux ran off to his shop, brought back the money, and dictated another bill, by which Bovary undertook to pay to his order, on the 1st of September next, the sum of 1,070 francs, which, with the 180 already agreed to, made just 1,250, thus lending at 6% in addition to 1/4 for commission, and the things bringing him in a good third at the least. This ought, in 12 months, to give him a profit of 130 francs. He hoped that the business would not stop there, that the bills would not be paid, that they would be renewed, and that his poor little money, having thriven at the doctor's as at a hospital, would come back to him one day considerably more plump and fat enough to burst his bag. Everything, moreover, succeeded with him. He was adjudicator for a supply of cider to the hospital at Neufchâtel. Monsieur Guillaumin promised him some shares in the turf pits of Gomenil, and he dreamt of establishing a new diligence service between Arcueil and Rouen, which no doubt would not be long in ruining the ramshackle van of the Lion d'Or, and that, travelling faster, at a cheaper rate, and carrying more luggage, would thus put into his hands the whole commerce of Yonville. Charles several times asked himself by what means he should next year be able to pay back so much money. He reflected imagined expedients, such as applying to his father or selling something, but his father would be deaf, and he had nothing to sell. Then he foresaw such worries that he quickly dismissed so disagreeable a subject of meditation from his mind. He reproached himself with forgetting Emma, as if, all his thoughts belonging to this woman, it was robbing her of something not to be constantly thinking of her. The winter was severe, Madame Bovary's convalescence slow. When it was fine, they wheeled her arm chair to the window that overlooked the square, for she now had an antipathy to the garden, and the blinds on that side were always down. She wished the horse to be sold; what she formerly liked now displeased her. All her ideas seemed to be limited to the care of herself. She stayed in bed, taking little meals, rang for the servant to inquire about her gruel or to chat with her. The snow on the market roof threw a white, still light into the room. Then the rain began to fall, and Emma waited daily with a mind full of eagerness for the inevitable return of some trifling events which nevertheless had no relation to her. The most important was the arrival of the "Hirondelle" in the evening. Then the landlady shouted, and other voices answered, while Hippolyte's lantern, as he fetched the boxes from the boot, was like a star in the darkness. At midday Charles came in, then he went out again. Next she took some beef tea, and towards 5 o'clock, as the day drew in, the children coming back from school, dragging their wooden shoes along the pavement, knocked the clapper of the shutters with their rulers one after the other. It was at this hour that Monsieur Bournisien came to see her. He inquired after her health, gave her news, exhorted her to religion, in a coaxing little prattle that was not without its charm. The mere thought of his cassock comforted her. One day, when at the height of her illness, she had thought herself dying, and had asked for the communion, and while they were making the preparations in her room for the sacrament, while they were turning the night table, covered with syrups, into an altar, and while Félicité was strewing dahlia flowers on the floor, Emma felt some power passing over her that freed her from her pains, from all perception, from all feeling. Her body, relieved, no longer thought. Another life was beginning, It seemed to her that her being, mounting toward God, would be annihilated in that love like a burning incense that melts into vapour. The bedclothes were sprinkled with holy water, the priest drew from the holy pyx the white wafer, and it was fainting with a celestial joy that she put out her lips to accept the body of the Saviour presented to her. The curtains of the alcove floated gently round her like clouds, and the rays of the two tapers burning on the night table seemed to shine like dazzling halos. Then she let her head fall back, fancying she heard in space the music of seraphic harps, and perceived in an azure sky, on a golden throne, in the midst of saints holding green palms, God the Father, resplendent with majesty, who, with the sign, sent to earth angels with wings of fire to carry her away in their arms. This splendid vision dwelt in her memory as the most beautiful thing that it was possible to dream, so that now she strove to recall her sensation. That still lasted, however, but in a less exclusive fashion, and with a deeper sweetness. Her soul, tortured by pride, at length found rest in Christian humility, and tasting the joy of weakness, she saw within herself the destruction of her will, that must have left a wide entrance for the inroads of heavenly grace. There existed, then, in the place of happiness, still greater joys, another love beyond all loves, without pause and without end, one that would grow eternally. She saw amid the illusions of her hope a state of purity floating above the earth mingling with heaven, to which she aspired. She wanted to become a saint. She bought chaplets and wore amulets. She wished to have in her room, by the side of her bed, a reliquary set in emeralds, that she might kiss it every evening. The cure marvelled at this humour, although Emma's religion, he thought, might, from its fervour, end by touching on heresy, extravagance. But not being much versed in these matters, as soon as they went beyond a certain limit, he wrote to Monsieur Boulard, bookseller to Monsignor, to send him "something good for a lady, who was very clever." The bookseller, with as much indifference as if he had been sending off hardware to niggers, packed up pell mell everything that was then the fashion in the pious book trade. There were little manuals in questions and answers, pamphlets of aggressive tone after the manner of Monsieur de Maistre, and certain novels in rose-coloured bindings and with a honeyed style, manufactured by troubadour seminarists or penitent bluestockings. They were the "Think of it! The Man of the World at Mary's Feet," by Monsieur de, decorated with many orders, the Errors of Voltaire for the use of the young, etc. Madame Bovary's mind was not yet sufficiently clear to apply herself seriously to anything. Moreover, she began this reading in too much hurry. She grew provoked at the doctrines of religion; the arrogance of the polemic writings displeased her by their inveteracy in attacking people she did not know; and the secular stories, relieved with religion, seemed to her written in such ignorance of the world that they insensibly estranged her from the truths for whose proof she was looking. Nevertheless, she persevered, and when the volume slipped from her hands, she fancied herself seized with the finest Catholic melancholy that an ethereal soul could conceive. As for the memory of Rodolphe, she had thrust it back to the bottom of her heart, and it remained there more solemn and more motionless than a king's mummy in a catacomb. An exhalation escaped from this embalmed love, that, penetrating through everything, perfumed with tenderness the immaculate atmosphere in which she longed to live. When she knelt on her Gothic prie-dieu, she addressed to the Lord the same suave words that she had murmured formerly to her lover in the outpourings of adultery. It was to make faith come, but no delights descended from the heavens, and she arose with tired limbs and with a vague feeling of a gigantic dupery. This searching after faith, she thought, was only one merit the more, and in the pride of her devoutness Emma compared herself to those grand ladies of long ago whose glory she had dreamt of over a portrait of La Valliere, and who, trailing with so much majesty the lace trimmed trains of their long gowns, retired into solitudes to shed at the feet of Christ all the tears of hearts that life had wounded. Then she gave herself up to excessive charity. She sewed clothes for the poor, she sent wood to women in childbed, and Charles, one day on coming home, found three good for nothings in the kitchen seated at the table eating soup. She had her little girl, whom during her illness her husband had sent back to the nurse, brought home. She wanted to teach her to read. Even when Berthe cried she was not vexed. She had made up her mind to resignation, to universal indulgence. Her language about everything was full of ideal expressions. She said to her child, "Is your stomach ache better, my angel?" Madame Bovary senior found nothing to censure except perhaps this mania of knitting jackets for orphans instead of mending her own house linen; but, harassed with domestic quarrels, the good woman took pleasure in this quiet house, and she even stayed there till after Easter, to escape the sarcasms of old Bovary, who never failed on Good Friday to order chitterlings. Besides the companionship of her mother in law, who strengthened her a little by the rectitude of her judgment and her grave ways, Emma almost every day had other visitors. These were Madame Langlois, Madame Caron, Madame Dubreuil, Madame Tuvache, and regularly, from 2 to 5 o'clock, the excellent Madame Homais, who, for her part, had never believed any of the tittle tattle about her neighbour. The little Homais also came to see her. Justin accompanied them. He went up with them to her bedroom, and remained standing near the door, motionless and mute. Often even Madame Bovary, taking no heed of him, began her toilette. She began by taking out her comb, shaking her head with a quick movement, and when he for the first time saw all this mass of hair that fell to her knees unrolling in black ringlets, it was to him, poor child, like a sudden entrance into something new and strange, whose splendour terrified him. Emma, no doubt, did not notice his silent attentions or his timidity. She had no suspicion that the love vanished from her life was there, palpitating by her side, beneath that coarse holland shirt, in that youthful heart open to the emanations of her beauty. Besides, she now enveloped all things with such indifference, she had words so affectionate with looks so haughty, such contradictory ways, that one could no longer distinguish egotism from charity, or corruption from virtue. One evening, for example, she was angry with the servant, who had asked to go out, and stammered as she tried to find some pretext. Then suddenly, "So you love him?" she said, and without waiting for any answer from Félicité, who was blushing, she added, "There, run along, enjoy yourself." In the beginning of spring she had the garden turned up from end to end, despite Bovary's remonstrances. However, he was glad to see her at last manifest a wish of any kind. As she grew stronger she displayed more wilfulness. First she found occasion to expel Mère Rollet, the nurse, who during her convalescence had contracted the habit of coming too often to the kitchen with her two nurslings and her boarder, better off for teeth than a cannibal. Then she got rid of the Homais family, successively dismissed all the other visitors, and even frequented church less assiduously, to the great approval of the druggist, who said to her in a friendly way, "You are going in a bit for the cassock." As formerly, Monsieur Bournisien dropped in every day when he came out after catechism class. He preferred staying out of doors to taking the air "in the grove," as he called the arbour. This was the time when Charles came home. They were hot. Some sweet cider was brought out, and they drank together to Madame's complete restoration. Binet was there, that is to say, a little lower down against the terrace wall, fishing for crayfish. Bovary invited him to have a drink, and he thoroughly understood the uncorking of the stone bottles. "You must," he said, throwing a satisfied glance all around him, even to the very extremity of the landscape, "hold the bottle perpendicularly on the table, and after the strings are cut, press up the cork with little thrusts, gently, gently, as indeed they do seltzer water at restaurants. But during his demonstration the cider often spurted right into their faces, and then the ecclesiastic, with a thick laugh, never missed this joke. "Its goodness strikes the eye." He was in fact a good fellow, and one day he was not even scandalized at the chemist, who advised Charles to give madame some distraction by taking her to the theatre at Rouen to hear the illustrious tenor Lagardy. Homais, surprised at this silence, wanted to know his opinion, and the priest declared that he considered music less dangerous for morals than literature. But the chemist took up the defence of letters. The theatre, he contended, served for railing at prejudices, and beneath a mask of pleasure taught virtue. Castigat ridendo mores, Monsieur Bournisien. Thus consider the greater part of Voltaire's tragedies. They are cleverly strewn with philosophical reflections that made them a vast school of morals and diplomacy for the people. "I," said Binet, "once saw a piece called the Gamin de Paris, in which there was a character of an old general that is really hit off to a T. He sets down a young swell who had seduced a working girl, who at the ending—" "Certainly," continued Homais, "there is bad literature, as there is bad pharmacy; but to condemn in a lump the most important of the fine arts seems to me a stupidity, a Gothic idea, worthy of the abominable times that imprisoned Galileo." "I know very well," objected the cure, "that there are good works, good authors. However, if it were only those persons of different sexes, united in a bewitching apartment, decorated with rouge, those lights, those effeminate voices, all this must, in the long run, engender a certain mental libertinage, give rise to immodest thoughts and impure temptations. Such, at any rate, is the opinion of all the fathers. Finally," he added, suddenly assuming a mystic tone of voice, while he rolled a pinch of snuff between his fingers, "if the Church has condemned the theatre, she must be right. We must submit to her decrees." "Why," asked the druggist, "should she excommunicate actors? For formerly they openly took part in religious ceremonies. Yes, in the middle of the chancel they acted. They performed a kind of farce called mysteries, which often offended against the laws of decency." The ecclesiastic contented himself with uttering a groan, and the chemist went on "It's like it is in the Bible. There are, you know, more than one piquant detail, matters really libidinous." And on a gesture of irritation from Monsieur Bournisien, "Ah, you'll admit that it is not a book to place in the hands of a young girl, and I should be sorry if Athalie—" "But it is the Protestants, and not we," cried the other impatiently, "who recommend the Bible." "No matter," said Homais. "I am surprised that in our days, in this century of enlightenment, any one should still persist in prescribing an intellectual relaxation that is inoffensive, moralizing, and sometimes even hygienic. Is it not, doctor?" "No doubt," replied the doctor carelessly, either because, sharing the same ideas, he wished to offend no one, or else because he had not any ideas. The conversation seemed at an end when the chemist thought fit to shoot a Parthian arrow. "I've known priests who put on ordinary clothes to go and see dancers kicking about." "Come, come!" said the cure. "Ah, I've known some." And separating the words of his sentence, Homais repeated, "I have known some." "Well, they were wrong," said Bournisien, resigned to anything. "By Jove, they go in for more than that!" exclaimed the druggist. "Sir!" replied the ecclesiastic, with such angry eyes that the druggist was intimidated by them. "I only mean to say," he replied in less brutal a tone, "that toleration is the surest way to draw people to religion." "That is true, that is true," agreed the good fellow, sitting down again on his chair. But he stayed only a few moments. Then, as soon as he had gone, Monsieur Homais said to the doctor, "That's what I call a cockfight. I beat him, did you see, in a way? Now take my advice, take madame to the theatre, if it were only for once in your life, to enrage one of these ravens, hang it!" If any one could take my place, I would accompany you myself. Be quick about it. Lagardy is only going to give one performance. He's engaged to go to England at a high salary. From what I hear, he's a regular dog. He's rolling in money. He's taking 3 mistresses and a cook along with him. All these great artists burn the candle at both ends. They require a dissolute life that suits the imagination to some extent, but they die at the hospital because they haven't the sense when young to lay by. Well, a pleasant dinner. Good bye till to morrow." The idea of the theatre quickly germinated in Bovary's head, for he at once communicated it to his wife, who at first refused, alleging the fatigue, the worry, the expense. But, for a wonder, Charles did not give in, so sure was he that this recreation would be good for her. He saw nothing to prevent it. His mother had sent them 300 francs, which he had no longer expected. The current debts were not very large, and the falling in of Lheureux's bills was still so far off that there was no need to think about them. Besides, imagining that she was refusing from delicacy, he insisted the more, so that by dint of worrying her she at last made up her mind, and the next day at 8 o'clock they set out in the "Hirondelle." The druggist, whom nothing whatever kept at Yonville, but who thought himself bound not to budge from it, sighed as he saw them go. "Well, a pleasant journey," he said to them, "happy mortals that you are." Then, addressing himself to Emma, who was wearing a blue silk gown with 4 flounces, "You are as lovely as a Venus. You'll cut a figure at Rouen." The diligence stopped at the Croix Rouge, in the Place Beauvoisine. It was the inn that is in every provincial faubourg, with large stables and small bedrooms, where one sees in the middle of the court chickens pilfering the oats under the muddy gigs of the commercial travellers; a good old house, with worm-eaten balconies that creak in the wind on winter nights, always full of people, noise, and feeding, whose black tables are sticky with coffee and brandy, the thick windows made yellow by the flies, the damp napkins stained with cheap wine, and that always smells of the village, like ploughboys dressed in Sunday clothes; has a cafe on the street, and towards the countryside a kitchen garden. Charles at once set out. He muddled up the stage boxes with the gallery, the pit with the boxes, asked for explanations, did not understand them, was sent from the box office to the acting manager, came back to the inn, returned to the theatre, and thus several times traversed the whole length of the town from the theatre to the boulevard. Madame Bovary bought a bonnet, gloves, and a bouquet. The doctor was much afraid of missing the beginning, and without having had time to swallow a plate of soup, they presented themselves at the doors of the theatre, which were still closed. Chapter 15